Hello, everyone. This is Kevin at Eagle Strong Voice. It is April the 15th, 2025. This is the 20th anniversary of the first Aboriginal Holocaust Memorial Day in Canada, where a handful of us began to confront the genocidal Catholic, Anglican, and United churches by going in and protesting and occupying these churches, the thing that eventually forced out the truth of genocide in Canada. I entitle this reflection "With More Than Remembrance, Staying True to All the Fallen." There were only 9 of us that first day. Then, as now, those who should have stood with us shrank back from confronting the churches that slaughtered generations of children. But fear had no room in we few that Sunday morning, for our minds and hearts were with the fallen. It was April 15th, 2005 in downtown Vancouver, where we first fired the shot that would be heard around the world. A decade had passed since 1995, when Harriet Nahani and I first made headlines about the Christian death camps falsely called Indian residential schools. Harriet was an Indigenous eyewitness to murders at the United Church School in Port Alberni. She had met me soon after my firing for speaking of the crime from my pulpit. Together we organized the first public teach-ins about the residential schools and the first International Human Rights Tribunal into the residential school crimes in 1998 in Vancouver. But by 2005, talking had done very little. It was time to confront the Catholic, Anglican, and United churches and bring those child killers to justice. And so began our escalating protests and eventually church occupations that forced Canadian church and state to admit to genocide, and that sparked a global movement that eventually toppled a pope. But with that victory came a counter-assault against us, and that killed a dozen of our people and buried the truth that we had previously surfaced at a cost beyond measure. Like the crime itself, this grassroots campaign that made Goliath stumble is mostly forgotten now, even among those who claim to know the story. We few survivors and the evidence that we unearthed have been scrubbed from the public memory and lost in the official night and fog required by any genocidal regime like Canada. So complete has been this erasure that the perpetrators now even claim that the crime didn't even happen. Canada's denial of its homegrown Holocaust has come full circle. And frankly, that's not surprising, since the extermination of Native people in Canada has never stopped. Just ask the Native people in northern Canada and on the west coast, and they'll tell you, and they'll show you. A few years ago, some of the serial killers of Native children dug under their own house and reported that they didn't find much there. Well, that's a surprise, eh? The staged dig at the former Kamloops Indian School was conducted by the RCMP, Catholics, and Band Council puppet chiefs. In short, by the very people who had killed the children in the first place. Based on that duplicitous whitewash, various blockhead bloggers are now saying, see, there never were any mass graves of children. Poof, 60,000 corpses are gone in an instant. Even some so-called credible journalists are now circulating the big lie. Well, in their hurry to be stupid, the genocide-denying bloggers forget, or maybe they never knew, that even the Canadian government has admitted that half the children were dying in these places for many decades because of their deliberate exposure to TB and smallpox, deliberate germ warfare. In 1998, we first published the death records from government and church archives proving that fact. We excavated children's remains at the Mohawk Indian School in Brantford in 2011 and had the bones forensically verified as coming from young children, something never reported in any Canadian media. The principal of the Mohawk School, John Zimmerman, had written in 1948, quote, "We've been forced to bury the children 2 and 3 to a grave," unquote. Well, the fact is that the burial teams at these death camps simply ran out of room, and often the little corpses had to be incinerated. Doesn't leave any remains. That's, after all, what war criminals do to get rid of the evidence. I've spoken to the people who dug those graves and who shoved bodies into the school furnaces. That's all been on the public record for over a quarter century, which you can see just by going over murderbydecree.com. So in the face of this evidence, anyone who still denies this atrocity and how we exposed it is not simply ignorant, they are complicit in the crime. They're also pissing on all those murdered children and on all my friends who died to bring out the truth. But regardless of any of that, the crime remains, as does the example of the few of us who named the names and knocked on the front door of evil. The proof that we revealed stands, as does the guilt of those criminal Catholic, Anglican, and United churches. As Harriet Nahanni remarked to me at one of our early church protests, as Catholics yelled obscenities at us, "Kevin, you can tell these people are guilty, just look at how they're reacting to us." The same is true for all of Canada. We can deny who we are and what we have done, but we cannot avoid the consequences of our actions, which are now blowing back on all of us. For centuries, North Americans have participated in and profited from the worst mass murder in human history, and they're still concealing the crime and wiping out any of us who reveal it. The continued trafficking and killing of children elicit barely a yawn from so-called awake Canadians, because too long an association with this institutionalized evil has killed our conscience and morality as a people, and has produced the present madness that's engulfing this continent. We're now, all of us, on the Indian reservation, and we're all facing the same extermination. That's known as the law of return. It's also called justice and judgment. In other words, folks, we deserve everything we get, and we ain't seen nothing yet. So now, two decades after we began our seemingly hopeless struggle, what speaks in my heart are the faces and the voices of my fallen friends, and those who they fought and they died for. People like Johnny Bingo Dawson, beaten to death by Vancouver police. William Coombs, poisoned, arsenic poisoning in St. Paul's Hospital after he spoke about Queen Elizabeth abducting his children. Harriet Nahanni, killed in Surrey prison in 2007, and the list goes on and on. But I also see their radiant expressions as we occupy those churches and stood down the priests and cops, and we turned the tables on the killers, just a few of us, mostly homeless Aboriginal people. I see Harriet Nahanni and William Coombs and Johnny and Harry Wilson, Ricky LaValle, Ron Barber, all of those people who were beaten to death or died in lonely jail cells or killed in hospitals. But their death is their victory, for they never gave up. And their spirit lives on in any of us who carry on the fight to shut down these genocidal churches and governments and corporations that continue to ravage the earth and the law and the innocent. It's time for all of you to break the web of complicity and ignorance that is the price of your participation in this blood-soaked lying culture. So honor yourselves as well as the fallen by joining the fight they died to win. Join our campaign to banish those genocidal churches and reclaim their wealth and properties as lawful reparations for their centuries of crime. And our campaign to stop the ongoing extermination of children. What else can a free and living soul do? For in the words of Thomas Paine, the valiant are forever triumphant, and even in defeat they remain great. Such a fall echoes down the ages with an immortality as great as glorious victories. To you from failing hands we throw the torch. Be yours to hold it high. If you break with faith with us who die, we shall not sleep. We shall not rest. This is Kevin Annett, Eagle Strong Voice, murderbydecree.com. Stand by for more.